The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I'll recognize myself for an opening statement, then my friend from Maryland, and we'll recognize the witnesses. When defending against waste, fraud, and abuse, inspectors general play a critical role within our federal agencies. While congressional oversight is essential, the 73 inspectors general best understand their agency issues and can clearly identify areas in need of reform. In fiscal year 2015, IG saved taxpayers roughly $37 billion on a total budget of $2.7 billion, which is a tremendous return on every dollar given to the IGs. In December 2016, the Inspectors General Empowerment Act was signed into law with bipartisan support. That was an effort led by the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, and the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Mark Meadows. Designed to support and strengthen IG independence, the IG Empowerment Act ensures federal investigators have full and prompt access to all agency documents needed for the investigatory process. In addition, the Act streamlines investigative procedures, improves transparency by instituting new reporting requirements, and increases efficiency to IG operations. While the Act implemented much-needed reforms, the IG community still has legislative priorities which could strengthen oversight of federal programs and resolve challenges facing the Inspector General community. The IG community is also currently facing the challenge of filling IG vacancies. Of the 73 IGs across the federal government, 14 positions remain vacant because either no nominee has been appointed or the appointed nominee still awaits Senate confirmation. For example, the Department of Interior has not appointed a permanent IG since 2009. Still, no nomination has been made to fill the position. In the case of the National Security Agency, which has been without a permanent leader since May 31st of 2016, it's been 147 days since this administration announced a nominee on June 19th, 2017. The administration has worked toward filling the vacancies by announcing an intent to nominate or officially nominate individuals to fill vacancies, but these nominees still require a confirmation process. When a vacancy occurs in an IG office, the agency head appoints an acting AG. These appointed often perform excellent work, but they are inherently less independent and less effective than one who is Senate confirmed. While the Senate and the administration are the key players in ensuring timely nominations and confirmations, the House will work with them to help speed appointments however and wherever we can. The work of our Inspectors General is too important for temporary leadership in the investigatory process. In order to ensure successful investigations, federal investigators must have access to information. Too often, IGs perform excellent oversight work, but they can't do it fully if an individual retires or resigns and removes them from the IG's jurisdiction. This leads to incomplete audits, incomplete investigations, or in some instances, closed investigations. One solution is to grant IGs testimonial subpoena authority. This would allow an IG to subpoena witnesses as necessary when performing the functions of the IG Act. Leaving office would no longer allow a federal employee to avoid testifying about potential misconduct or, frankly, any fact pattern. We look forward to working with our colleagues in the minority and in the Senate to create a solution to grant IGs testimonial subpoena authority. I'll thank our witnesses again for your service to our country and for your appearance today. And with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing. Inspectors General serve a critical role by providing an independent check on the executive branch. They investigate waste, fraud, abuse, and they provide recommendations to improve agency performance. I want to thank each of the IGs who is testifying here today, and I want to thank all of the IGs who do a phenomenal job in the various agencies. The work that you and your staff members do is more important now than ever. The Oversight Committee is the primary investigative body in the House, and we rely tremendously on IGs in conducting our own oversight work. Let me address one key example. In 2015, this committee launched a bipartisan investigation following revelations by John Roth, who's present with us today, the IG at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Roth identified grave concerns about security deficiencies at our nation's airports. As part of our investigation, our committee heard from numerous whistleblowers who bravely reported security problems at airports and management challenges faced by the Transportation Security Administration. Some of those individuals alleged that TSA retaliated against them for making those disclosures. In March, Carolyn Lerner, who was serving as the special counsel, testified before our committee that TSA was refusing to provide information about whistleblower cases. She also testified that TSA was impairing the ability of the special counsel to fully investigate those cases. On March 6, 2017, our former chairman, Jason Chaffetz, sent a letter to TSA requesting the information that TSA was withholding. The acting general counsel at DHS responded that the agency, quote, objects to the demand, end of quote, that it provide these documents to the committee. So on March 17, 2017, the committee issued a subpoena for these documents. But DHS, listen to this, DHS still refused to turn over the documents. On March 31st, 2017, the acting general counsel sent a letter to the committee writing that the agency is, and I quote, not in a position to produce those documents at this time. That was in March. To address this refusal, Chairman Chaffetz and I joined together in sending a bipartisan letter to the acting administrator of TSA warning that, quote, failure to comply with a congressional subpoena may result in serious consequences for you, end of quote. We also requested transcribed interviews with 3 TSA employees, Deputy Administrator, an Acting Assistant Administrator, and the Chief Counsel. None of these witnesses voluntarily complied with our requests, which we made in May. In the meantime, Mr. Roth has continued his oversight work, and he has issued 2 classified reports in recent weeks with critical warnings that many security problems remain unresolved. Listen up, listen up. I've often said that if we find out about our problems as members of Congress and then we fail to act on them when we have been given the authority by the American people, then we become a part of the problem. So I appreciate that the Chairman Gowdy, agreed to join me in sending a letter to TSA to request documents related to the IG's findings. But that request has nothing to do with the documents that are being withheld about the whistleblowers. We must also take action to compel TSA to comply with the committee's subpoena, which TSA has been defying for 8 months. Yesterday, I sent a letter to Chairman Gowdy laying all of this out and requesting that the committee enforce its subpoena for these documents. I also requested deposition subpoenas for the 3 TSA officials who have refused to participate in transcribed interviews. These are issues my staff have been raising for several weeks, if not months. Here's the bottom line. I do not believe that we can afford to wait. The security of air travel is not a partisan issue. Every person who flies on an airplane, works in an airport, or drives to the airport to pick up a family member wants to know that they will be safe. God forbid if something terrible were to happen, I want to know that we did everything, every single thing in our power, to conduct vigorous oversight to protect the American people. That is what we are sworn to do. And in addition to that, if we do not protect these whistleblowers, if we let the agency defy this subpoena, and if we allow the agency to flout our interview requests, that will have a negative impact on whistleblowers across the board. And all of us know in this committee that a lot of our work and a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse that we've been able to discover have been because people have sat at that table many times with tears in their eyes, trembling. They simply wanted their government to work properly, but they came forward bravely to offer evidence so that we could do our jobs. And so it will act as a deterrent to anyone who is thinking about coming forward to report dangerous security failures or anything else. And that, in turn, will damage our oversight efforts and the operations of our government. And with that, I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I would say,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Chairman, for all these reasons, pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2K6, I hereby move to subpoena TSA officials Hubin Gawandia, Francine Kerner, and Stephen Colin to appear before this committee. And it is public knowledge, Mr. Chairman, that these folks allegedly were a part of the retaliation. That is my motion.
Well, I want to thank my friend from Maryland for a couple of things. Number one, for the passion with which he spoke on this issue. I've heard you do it before, and I know you mean every syllable of what you said. We should not have to resort to compulsory process to gain access to documents or witnesses, but I want every agency that's paying attention to know that we will. And you have my commitment. We are in one accord. You have my commitment, Mr. Cummings, that when you and I see each other in Baltimore, we're either going to have a date for a voluntary interview or we're going to have a date for an involuntary interview. But we're going to have a date with an interview to either gain access to the information or have a much better understanding of the legal basis by which this committee is being denied the information. And you have my commitment on that.
With that, Mr. Chairman, let me be clear so that everybody in the room knows when he says in Baltimore, he's just not coming for a walk in the park, although I'd like for him to come to my city to do that. That's our next hearing, members of the committee. With that, Mr. Chairman, I take your word, and I want to thank you for working with me and trying to resolve this issue. Mr. Chairman, it is embedded in the DNA of my brain, watching people tremble at that table, trying to share their views and knowing that that they could be harmed. And so with that, I withdraw my motion, and I look forward to what we have on the 28th. Thank you.
Well, they have a powerful and persuasive advocate in you, and we are in one accord on this, and I appreciate you working with me on it. With that, all of us would welcome our witnesses. I will introduce you en banc and then recognize you individually for your 5-minute opening. From my left to right, we are pleased to have the Honorable Michael Horowitz, Chair of the Council on Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency and Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Justice. The Honorable Kathy Buller, Executive Chair of the Legislative Committee on the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency and Inspector General at the Peace Corps. And the Honorable John Roth, Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Welcome to all of you, and with that, IG Horowitz, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. The IG community appreciates this committee's steadfast bipartisan support, including your efforts last year to get the IG Empowerment Act adopted. Because of our statutory independence, IGs are uniquely positioned to identify waste, fraud, and abuse. As the chairman indicated, in FY 2016, the IG community identified potential cost savings of over $45 billion. Compared to our community's budgets combined of about $2.7 billion, that represents about a $17 return on investment. In addition, IG investigations resulted in almost 5,000 successful criminal prosecutions, over 1,500 civil actions, over 6,000 suspensions and debarments, and over 4,000 personnel actions. And I'm pleased to report that for the first time, all public IG reports can be found in one place at a website that the Council of IGs launched on October 1st called oversight.gov. We also launched on that date our first ever Twitter account at oversight.gov. We hope that everyone who is interested and cares about our work in the IG community visits oversight.gov and follows us on Twitter. The passage of the IG Empowerment Act greatly enhanced our ability to conduct independent oversight. The Act made it clear that IGs must be given unimpeded and timely access to all agency records, and since the passage of the Act, I am not aware of any IG office facing a legal impediment to IG access. However, there remain concerns by several IGs about the timeliness of our access to information. Foot-dragging by agencies delays our work, impacting our ability to identify important issues that could save the taxpayers significant amounts of money, and is wholly unacceptable. SIGI will continue to work on these issues, and we appreciate the continued support of this committee in those efforts. The IG Empowerment Act also granted IGs an important tool in our fight against improper and duplicative payments, an exemption from the Computer Matching Act. I can report to you that the IG community this year has been moving forward to use this new tool in appropriate and effective ways, and I expect it will demonstrate real results because of your giving us that authority. As IG Buller will outline, we believe that some additional authorities would further enhance our ability to identify wasteful and improper spending. One example is testimonial subpoena authority, as the chairman mentioned. My office continues to face issues with regard to getting access to information and testimony from former DOJ employees in our investigations, audits, and reviews, including in recent whistleblower retaliation matters and sexual harassment claims. Having testimonial subpoena authority would allow us to obtain that critical evidence. Another area of potential concern to the IG community, which IG Roth will discuss, is the impact that flat or declining budgets would have on our ability to conduct the kind of oversight that the public expects from us. Given our track record of returning to the Federal Treasury far more money than we are budgeted, and our important role in public safety and national security matters, we believe careful consideration should be given before impacting our budgets. Finally, I'd like to briefly mention an issue that affects my office in particular. Unlike IGs throughout the federal government, the DOJ OIG does not have authority to investigate allegations of misconduct by all DOJ employees. While we have jurisdiction to review misconduct by agents and non-lawyers in the department, the IG Act does not give us that same authority over department prosecutors when they act in their capacity as lawyers. In those instances, the IG Act grants exclusive investigative authority to the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility. There's no principled reason why FBI misconduct is investigated by a statutorily independent IG, while prosecutorial misconduct is overseen by a DOJ component head appointed by the department's leadership. I want to thank Congressman Heiss for co-sponsoring a bill with Congressman Richmond and Congressman Conyers that would fix that issue and address that anomaly. This concludes my prepared statement, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz. IG Buller.
Chairman Gowdy, Ranking Member Cummings, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to appear before you today and discuss the work of the Inspectors General to promote integrity and efficiency. As both the Inspector General for the Peace Corps and the Chair of the Legislation Committee for the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, my testimony today underscores our appreciation for the bipartisan support we've received from this committee and from Congress. For almost 40 years, IGs have helped hold federal agencies accountable, protected whistleblowers, exposed corruption and mismanagement, and helped Congress make informed decisions about the agencies within their purview. This work is made easier thanks to the Inspector General Empowerment Act, which reaffirms a fundamental authority under the Inspector General Act of 1978 that all means all, that IGs may access all materials and documents necessary for our oversight work. Thanks to the bipartisan efforts of this committee and its staff, the passage of the Inspector General Empowerment Act restores what Congress intended. IGs must have timely access to all of the materials and documents necessary to oversee their agencies. At the Peace Corps, I'm pleased to report that the IG Empowerment Act has restored critical access that allows us to oversee the Peace Corps' response to sexual assaults. This helps ensure volunteers who experience sexual assaults receive the care and services they deserve. I've seen an appreciable, positive change towards a culture of openness and cooperation. I hope this emboldens whistleblowers who were reluctant to step forward in the past. The IG Empowerment Act also provides the tools to ensure independence and improve our oversight authority. In particular, exemptions from the Computer Matching Act and the Paperwork Reduction Act ensure IG independence and help us more efficiently prevent and detect fraud and conduct timely surveys without being subject to the approval from the agencies we oversee. The IG Council has taken steps, including creating guides and working groups, to help IGs use these new tools thoughtfully and responsibly. I'm encouraged by IG initiatives to use computer matching, such as the one initiated by the IGs at the Department of Labor and VA to detect fraud in federal benefit programs. Our growing capabilities will improve the data-informed oversight sought by Congress. The Legislation Committee assists Congress as it considers legislation to improve IG's ability to carry out oversight of taxpayers. I want to briefly mention 3 priority items that the IG community has identified to further improve our ability to oversee federal operations. First, IGs would like to work with Congress to protect information that can be used to exploit cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Our reviews, including congressionally mandated reviews, identify weaknesses in federal IT systems. Public disclosure of this information could be a roadmap for malicious entities. While classified and law enforcement information is protected from public disclosure, there is no single protection that covers all IT security vulnerability information. Second, as other IGs have testified before, the resignation of federal employees during the course of an audit, investigation, or review has substantially hampered our work. Most IGs lack the ability to compel the testimony of witnesses who have information that cannot be obtained by any other means. This authority was unanimously supported by this committee and the House during the last Congress, though it was not included in the bill that became law. We are encouraged by this committee's continued consideration and bipartisan support of testimonial subpoena authority for IGs. Finally, legislative reforms have the potential to turn the Program Fraud Civil Remedies Act from an underutilized tool into an effective mechanism to recover fraud expenditures. CIGI has proposed several straightforward changes to help agencies use the Act in cases of small dollar fraud or in qui tam relator cases where DOJ declines prosecution. If used to its full potential, the recoveries could be significant. The Inspector General community is grateful for the steadfast bipartisan support we have received from Congress. Collaboration with this committee and its dedicated staff, both for the Inspector General Empowerment Act and other initiatives, has been incredibly constructive. From our training initiative, Meet the IGs, to the regular technical assistance we provide, our proactive efforts to keep each other informed have yielded productive results for the taxpayer. We look forward to continuing to be an important resource to this committee and other congressional stakeholders as you pursue your oversight and legislative work. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, IG Buller. IG Roth.
Chairman Gowdy, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today to testify. I believe I speak for the entire OIG community in expressing my gratitude to the committee for its leadership in championing the IG Empowerment Act and the cause of vigorous and independent oversight. OIG's reporting relationship to Congress is a key feature of the Inspector General Act. Inspectors General can only recommend to our agency, but we cannot direct our agency. Therefore, congressional oversight plays a critical role in ensuring if department operations, that which gets paid attention to, simply put, gets fixed. Probing, fact-based oversight, whether done internally by an Inspector General or externally by a congressional committee, can help bring about positive change. The critical and skeptical review of programs and operations, conducted in full view of the public, acts as the disinfectant of sunlight to ensure improved transparency, accountability, and efficiency in government. We appreciate that Congress, and this committee in particular, recognizes the value of Inspectors General and willingly steps up for OIGs by passing legislation that empowers us. Simply put, without the support of Congress and the significant independence and access provisions contained within the IG Act, we would be unable to do our job. Let me give you an example. After conducting our most recent tests, covert tests at airport security checkpoints, we identified vulnerabilities with the TSA screener performance, screener equipment, and associated procedures. Ultimately, we made 8 recommendations in our classified report that, when implemented, should improve TSA's performance in this area. Within weeks of our report being issued, this committee had already followed up with the department, reaching out to the acting secretary to determine what actions TSA is currently taking to address issues we raised in our report. This committee has held numerous hearings on other aspects of TSA's programs and operations and have assisted in bringing senior-level focus to some of those challenges. Additionally, this committee is well aware of the work we've previously done regarding Secret Service workforce issues, and the oversight of this committee was integral in getting the department to focus on those issues and change the culture there. Without such vigorous oversight and congressional interest in evaluating programs, there's less motivation to enact difficult institutional change. Unfortunately, many OIGs, including my office, face cuts in the President's fiscal 2018 budget request. Some of these cuts are incremental, but some offices are cut quite drastically. These budget cuts can present an ongoing challenge for many in the Inspector General community. The vast majority of our expenses are used to pay our auditors, inspectors, and our investigators, so budget cuts have a dramatic impact on operations, particularly with the small IG offices. Without the resources to do the job, no matter how strong the provisions in the IG Act with regard to independence and access to information, and no matter how strong the support from this committee and others, money can always be used as a weapon to diminish our ability to conduct the active and independent oversight that Congress and the public deserve. These proposed cuts make little sense given the contributions Inspectors General make. The Brookings Institute recently issued a report which analyzed the financial impact on government when OIG's budgets are cut, and found that cuts to OIG budgets actually cost the government money and contribute to the federal deficit. In fact, Brookings concluded, and I quote, that OIGs often function as a revenue-positive institution, entities that bring in more revenue than they cost. And as Mr. Horowitz noted in his testimony, CIGI's own data showed a 17-to-1 ratio of money spent by OIGs to money saved by our recommendations. So cutting the Inspectors General doesn't make any sense economically. And that 17-to-1 figure actually understates our performance because it does not measure improvements that result in increased national security and public safety. Much of our best work, audit and inspections report that shed light on dangerous or ineffective programs, for example, don't carry with it a cost savings, but the value to the American taxpayer is incalculable. Finally, let me permit me to publicly acknowledge the auditors, inspectors, and investigative agents that work not only for me at DHS-IG, but throughout the IG community. They come to work every day with the mission to make our government work better, to be more effective and efficient, and to ensure integrity. Being an independent entity within the organization, whose job it is to ask the hard questions, is a tough job. But without the dedication of the men and women who do the work, we would not be able to point to the successes that we have talked about this morning. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions you or members of the committee may have.
Thank you, IG Roth. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn before they actually begin to testify. So I would ask you to please rise and raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Let the record reflect all witnesses answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership on this particular issue. Obviously, as we look at making sure that accountability and oversight is conducted, there is no group of individuals that are truly more welcome than our inspectors general. I can say that having worked with all three of you, this is not your first rodeo. We welcome you back. But, Mr. Roth, as you were just mentioning, it is the men and women who serve within your particular agencies that deserve a round of applause from the American people and, quite frankly, from members of Congress. What I've come to understand far too often is that members of Congress normally only show up when there is a problem, not when things are going well. So you have my commitment to all three of you as you invite me and other members of this committee to come in to do what I would say is a thank you tour, a thank you for a job well done. So, Mr. Horowitz, let me come to you because obviously, with all the attention that has been directed at the Department of Justice and ongoing investigations, are you finding, because of the IG Empowerment Act, your job is a bit easier to do with regards to cooperation within DOJ?
I have heard from my entire staff, auditors, investigators, review teams, that their job has been made much easier by that. We are no longer getting the legal impediments, roadblocks thrown in our way. We occasionally have timeliness issues that come up that require elevating, and they get fixed, but it's night and day from what you and other members of this committee heard repeatedly over the past 5 years about our ability to get our jobs done. That has improved markedly.
And so do I have all three of your commitment that if you start to see those impediments, even under a new administration, that you will report back to this committee expeditiously to let us know so that we can hopefully alleviate any of those hurdles?
Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if you could acknowledge that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative on that particular issue. Mr. Horowitz, let me come back to you because obviously there are some ongoing investigations as they relate to some of the issues at DOJ. In the past, we have run into, not with DOJ, but we have run into other issues where the Inspector General has said, well, they didn't want Congress doing oversight and investigations simultaneously. Based on some of the ongoing investigations that you are involved with, do you see if Congress embarks on a strenuous oversight investigation, would that hamper your ability to do your job?
No, we believe, and we've talked about this, that we would be able to move forward with our review, particularly, for example, our ongoing election review that we are looking forward to completing in the not-too-distant future, and it would not impact us. And I would just point to our experience with the Fast and Furious review that we did. When I became IG in 2012, this committee had an ongoing and quite active review, and both moved forward in parallel fashions, and it did not impede us in any way.
So any requests for documents that this committee or members of the Judiciary Committee, since they have primary jurisdiction over DOJ, any requests for documents that they would make either here in the House or in the Senate would not be seen as being an impediment to your ongoing investigation at this particular point?
That's correct. Any documents the department has created itself, obviously we would want to have discussions before any records we had produced, created in the course of this, would be produced. But any pre-existing and other records in the department's custody, we would have no objection to the department providing a response to a congressional request.
Well, as you're aware, I mean, there have been some requests for documents that have actually been conveyed. So outside of private grand jury information that you've received. Can you see any reason why any of the other documents that have been shared with you would not be shared with either the House or the Senate?
I'm not aware of any such issues. Grand jury would be the obvious one.
Sure.
That would be an issue.
Mr. Roth, let me come to you in my final 16 seconds. You have been hard-hitting on some of your analysis in a number of ways, and I've enjoyed reading your reports and have read them many times over and over again. Do you believe at this particular point that you have the tools necessary to make sure that from a DHS standpoint that we can get to the bottom of so many things that have plagued the agency, and do you have the necessary tools to be able to do that?
We do. I was in somewhat different position than Mr. Horowitz, that the culture at DHS was to provide documents. We've never had access issues. We have some timeliness issues, but that's a matter of ensuring that those issues get escalated to the right level and then they get solved. But given the IG Act and the IG Empowerment Act, we are in a pretty good place.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized. Gentleman from North Carolina yields back.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, I want to clarify a comment I made earlier, Mr. Chairman. The subpoena that I requested earlier relates to 3 TSA officials who were either allegedly involved in retaliation or involved in the decision to withhold documents regarding retaliation. I didn't want to paint a broad picture, but at least 2 of them were involved in retaliation. I just want to clear that up.
Yes, sir. We're in one accord.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Horowitz, in your testimony, you stated that there are currently 14 vacant IG positions and that 12 of those are presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed positions. The President has not nominated a candidate for 5 of these positions, including the Departments of the Interior, Energy, Defense, Housing, and Urban Development, and the Federal Election Commission. Is that right?
That's correct, although the FEC position is an agency-appointed position, so that wouldn't be a presidential one.
All right. The Department of the Interior has been without a permanent IG for over 3,000 days. Mr. Horowitz, in your testimony, you stated, and I quote, "A sustainable absence of permanent leadership is not healthy for any office, particularly one entrusted with the important and challenging mission of the IG. Do you believe extended vacancies could affect the ability of the IG offices to make long-term commitments to projects?"
Absolutely, and you know, acting IGs do great work. My position was vacant for about 15 months, but the IGs, acting IGs, understand that they've got to be careful on any long-term issues while there's a vacancy. And not surprisingly, the access issues I faced, as you know, occurred during that period where there was no confirmed IG.
Are there any constraints on acting IGs being able to make decisions in the same way that a permanent IG would do?
There aren't, and we've at SIGI strongly supported acting IGs to make sure they know we've got their back if that comes up. But it means there's a significant difference between having been confirmed for a position and going through and knowing you're staying versus filling a seat with the unknown of how long is that going to be and who's going to come next.
On April 12, 2017, then Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz and the ranking member, myself, wrote to President Trump asking him to nominate qualified independent individuals to fill these open spots. You said in your testimony that SIGI works with the White House to recommend candidates with exemplary qualifications. Are you satisfied that the White House is considering the recommendations from SIGI?
We've had a very good working relationship with them in reviewing candidates. They've made sure we've reviewed and interviewed and passed along our views on every candidate. So far, all 7 candidates that they've nominated have come through our office. I obviously can't speak to how the other vacancies will play out, but so far it has been an open and productive dialogue.
You know, on my way over here this morning to the committee, a reporter asked me a very interesting question. He asked, what do I worry about or am I concerned about the folks being appointed to the IG positions? And I told him, no, I'm not worried at all, because the people that every IG that I've ever met have been very honorable people, and they're going to do what is right no matter what and uphold the Constitution. And so I don't have any concerns about that. Some vacancies, of course, are pending before the Senate. Robert Storch, who worked for you, Mr. Horowitz, was nominated almost 5 months ago, but his nomination still has not been approved by the Senate. Is that right?
Yep, and I'll make a pitch for Rob. He's still my deputy, National Security Agency nominee, and my whistleblower ombudsman. So to your point earlier, this is someone who would bring to the intelligence community real experience in whistleblowing issues, which, as we know, is critically important there. He's gone through 3 committees. 3 committees have approved that nomination because of the position, and he's awaiting confirmation on the floor.
Just last question. Tell us how significant the whistleblower ombudsman is, and what are they doing?
I share your passion, Congressman, about whistleblowers and the importance of supporting them. We've dealt with them, and if anybody has any question about how important whistleblowers are, go to oversight.gov, type in whistleblowers in the search term. You'll get back all the reports that reference whistleblowers that have resulted in important reports that we've issued. There are hundreds of them, and that's because they know the key information that we need, and having whistleblower ombudsmen is a way to further encourage people to come forward, to have a comfort level that they're going to talk with somebody who understands and cares about and knows about the challenges they're going to face, and can give them information about the process. So it's not mysterious, it's not an unknown, and all of us in the IG community take seriously any retaliation against whistleblowers. So our ombudsmen are involved in training within the community. We've created in SIGI a first-ever ombudsman group that's helping agencies with training. My own agency, DOJ, we've worked with the department as well. So it's a very important issue for us. And we support, by the way, the legislation that this committee has put forward and you have been so instrumental on that would make those positions permanent.
Thank you very much.
The gentleman from Maryland yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all, panel, for being here today, as always. Mr. Horowitz, according to your website, your office is conducting an ongoing review of the Drug Enforcement Administration's efforts to prevent opioids from being distributed to unauthorized users. Can you give me an update of the status of the review, and when will that review be complete?
Well, we initiated that just a couple of months ago, and so we're in the, frankly, relatively early stages. We're in the middle of getting documents, reviewing documents, and conducting interviews. I could probably give you a better idea early in the year on what our timeline looks like, but our reviews roughly take about a year or so.
Okay, that's fair. Any initial or early delays that you're concerned about at this point?
No, the relationship with DEA has changed dramatically from what it was, and this committee understands perhaps better than anybody.
Yes, we're thrilled to continue to hear about that, to continue to expound on that even more in the days ahead. Mr. Roth, or General Roth, the DHS OIG released a management alert for FEMA on September 29, 2017, relating to the housing programs FEMA is implementing in Texas following Hurricane Harvey. The OIG made a point to release this management alert quickly so FEMA would still have time to heed the OIG's recommendation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Has FEMA responded to that management alert or provided feedback in any way?
They have responded, and we are working with them. What we want to try to do is have a relationship where we can bring attention to these issues, then work with them to try to get a solution. What we were worried about, particularly in that situation, was the fact that they contracted with a local state entity to provide housing assistance, but the contract that they used didn't have the kinds of measures that a typical federal contract would have. You know, what is the responsibility of FEMA? What is the responsibility of the state? How do you measure performance? What happens if performance isn't conducted? Those kinds of things. So we were working with them to try to convince them or to have them understand why it is that these things are important.
You are familiar with the STEP pilot program that FEMA first used after Hurricane Sandy, I would imagine. FEMA continues to use variations of this pilot program. They used it again after the flooding in Baton Rouge last year, and now they're using it again after the hurricanes this year. But the problem, I guess, is they still haven't implemented your recommendations. Can you speculate or tell me why is it important? First of all, speculate why they haven't, and tell me why it's important that FEMA does include those recommendations.
Yeah, this is one of the constant criticisms that we've had over time with FEMA is the fact that that every disaster seems to bring challenges that they had faced before and yet had not put in procedures in place. FEMA is a very highly decentralized organization that's really developed around the regional structure. So the procedure that was used, for example, in Miami would be different than the procedure that was used in Houston, as opposed to having sort of standardized national criteria and policies and procedures. And the STEP program really is the poster child for that. We first notified them that this was a high-risk pilot program back in 2012. They didn't do anything. We did another audit report in early 2017. Again, there were issues, and then finally we have this management alert that says you need to develop policies and procedures so you're not making this up every single time.
So we're now, I guess, past 5 years from your initial recommendations to FEMA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. With that, I will yield back to our chairman.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields back. The gentlelady from New York is recognized. Yes, yes, ma'am. The gentlelady from the District of Columbia.
And I appreciate not only this hearing, Mr. Chairman, but all of our witnesses. Mr. Roth, I have questions for you because of my concern about Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. On a scale of 1 to 10, let us look at Puerto Rico first because the distress continues there. What would you give the response to the hurricane in Puerto Rico on a scale of 1 to 10?
We are looking at that very issue, as is the GAO, to try to assess exactly how the situation has been. We haven't come to any conclusions that I'm prepared to talk about at this point, but we have people right now on the ground asking that very question.
Well, because of our confidence in inspectors general, I'm sure you are unaffected by the fact that the president has already given the federal response a grade of 10 out of 10. Very concerned for the future of responses, not only in places like Puerto Rico, surrounded by water, but throughout the United States, that there could be a $300 million contract given to a company that had 2 employees. Mr. Roth, I have to ask you, is there anything that could flag that instantly so that we don't have what we have now? What we have now is the contract that's finally been withdrawn. It wasn't withdrawn because of any action of this committee or the Congress of the United States. It was a public outcry to what continues in Puerto Rico. So it was indeed withdrawn. Is there, I mean, once somebody gets a contract, and I won't even, because I think in a real sense I'd like to put aside the possible, the conjecture about political contracts and the rest of it. Isn't there anything in the government or in your office to flag somebody getting a contract who has 2 employees, or do we have to wait until the public demands that contract be withdrawn?
Certainly when FEMA is involved, we can tell you what the process is. Now, my understanding with the Puerto Rico...
Well, sure, FEMA was involved.
Well, that's still unclear, and in fact, we're looking at that specific issue, the circumstances surrounding the letting of that contract and whether the federal government was involved in that. But I will tell you what we are doing in all 3 disaster areas. We are part of the Joint Field Office, so we have auditors and criminal investigators who are part of the team there, and one of the things that they do—
Are they doing that, are the auditors there now?
Yes.
Because I note that I have a New York Times article here that Governor Rosello has asked for a federal investigation of the contract. I'm now quoting from the New York Times, and for the power authority and the power and authority to appoint a trustee to review contract bidding. Is that the direction in which we're going now with respect to Puerto Rico?
So what we're doing in Puerto Rico is, again, we have an audit staff that's down there. In fact, my deputy is down there as we speak.
Well, that's very reassuring. I have one more question that I must ask you before my time runs out. There was an 8-day delay in appointing a 3-star general to go down there. I don't know when there's been a disaster as bad as Puerto Rico. Now we understand that that general, Lieutenant General Jeffrey Buchanan, is leaving Puerto Rico, along with all of his military equipment, and they don't have power in Puerto Rico yet. How is that justified, Mr. Roth, to be pulling the military who was necessary to get anything going in the first place? And are you looking into the withdrawal of the military after the delay in getting the military there and the continuing crisis in Puerto Rico with no electricity and people still screaming and yelling that they're not being treated fairly?
We are looking at FEMA's response and DHS's response.
Are you looking at the withdrawal of the military?
To the extent that DHS was involved in that decision, we will certainly consider it as part of our overall review. I would also note that GAO has announced that they are doing a fairly fulsome review of those very same issues.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that I believe there ought to be a subpoena because the White House is withholding information relating to the administration's response to hurricanes in Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, where there is still immense distress. If we can't get it any other way, I hope we will consider a subpoena.
Gentlelady from the District of Columbia yields back. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, we sent a letter, we request to your office requesting that you produce a complete case files for your office's report, FEMA's initial response to the 2016 catastrophic flooding in Louisiana. And we ask that you provide those materials no later than 5 p.m. on July 31st. Those materials were not produced. We extended that, gave you a little bit longer. And your office still hasn't provided those. Can you tell me why you haven't provided those documents?
Sure. The reason we haven't provided them is that the audit is not complete. We issued a report with regard to the flooding in northern Louisiana, and it was pointed out that there were some factual discrepancies within that report. We took those very seriously. We took down that report because we had concerns about the accuracy of it. I instituted an entirely new audit team that was completely separate, had a different chain of command from the audit team that had done the original report. They are still working through those issues right now, so the audit is not complete, and as a result, we're not able to produce those documents.
When do you anticipate completing the audit and producing the documents?
I will have to give you an update on that. I don't have that information in front of me. It should be a matter of months because we want to do this thoroughly. We understand the concerns that were raised with regard to that report.
How much material are you having to go through? I mean, when
sorry?
you're talking about matter of months. I mean, are we talking 10,000 pages, 1 million pages? Why can't we be a little bit more timely with it, a little bit more specific about how long it'll take to produce those documents?
As I said, we're just going to have to take a look. I'm going to just simply have to take a look and see where we are with regard to the process. We take it very seriously when people raise issues with regard to the accuracy of our reports. That's our bread and butter. We want to make sure it's completely accurate before we release a report. or decline to release a report if we can't salvage it.
I'm not satisfied with a matter of months. I want to know why you can't produce an audit. Do you not have enough people doing the audit? What's the holdup? I mean,
As I said, it's
you've
important.
had 4 months. You've had more than 4 months. So we would. I don't think it's acceptable to say that you know, this open-ended response that it'll be a matter of months. When can we expect to get a report?
Yeah. Well, I can't give you a definitive answer here. I'll go back to my folks and see if we can accelerate the time schedule.
Okay, how long will it take for you to give us a definitive answer?
As to a timetable?
Yeah, can you do it?
I imagine we can do that by next week.
Okay, can we get that answer by Friday of next week? Well,
Yes.
no, wait a minute, that's Thanksgiving. Mr.
Thanksgiving
Chairman,
week,
what would be an acceptable time? The Monday after Thanksgiving?
If that is within the realm of possible for the IG and acceptable to my friend from Alabama, we'll say the Monday after Thanksgiving.
Is that good?
We'll report back then.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Horowitz, the Council Inspector General on Integrity and Efficiency has plans for the expansion of oversight government.gov, oversight.gov, and other related efforts. How have the IGs and agencies responded to that initial effort?
Well, certainly the IG community has been very supportive, and we've gotten that up and running, and oversight.gov was put forward and put together with no additional funding. We would like to, and have talked with members of Congress and OMB about creating an open recommendations website. I think that's something members across the board have asked us about, OMB's interested in. I think it would be very valuable. Many of those open recommendations carry billions of dollars in cost savings. We'd like to get a whistleblower-friendly reporting webpage up. Some of that will require some additional funding. We've estimated in the $1 million to $2 million range to develop the pages and staff them, and we're looking forward to talking with members of Congress and OMB about that.
Well, quickly, have you looked at creating a recommendations database similar to what the GAO uses? They've been,
Right.
I've worked on a number of issues with the GAO and General Dodaro, and it's been extremely helpful. That are you guys doing the same thing?
Absolutely. In fact, that is the impetus for a lot of this. In fact, that was the first impetus for oversight.gov, was looking at GAO's webpage, because you can go to GAO's webpage, and now you can go to oversight.gov and see all of their work across the entire federal government. You couldn't do that until October 1 with the IGs. So the first step was oversight.gov. I've talked with Mr. Dodaro and others at GAO about how we can do that. And I don't know if this is possible because I'm not the right tech person to figure this out. But the ideal scenario would be we can develop a open recommendations page that talks with their open recommendations page so that members of Congress, OMB, the public can see across both of our organizations the open recommendations and how long they've been open.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman from Alabama yields back. The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member and all the panelists. I'd like to ask Mr. Roth, your office recently issued a classified report on the Federal Air Marshals Service, or FAMS. The unclassified summary of your classified report includes the title of the report, which is, and I quote, FAMS contribution to aviation transportation security is questionable. Now, I recognize that you can't speak about classified material, but to the extent that you can talk about the unclassified part of this report, can you explain why the contribution of the Federal Air Marshal Service to aviation transportation is, in your opinion, questionable?
I can't obviously talk about the specifics of the report, but what I can talk about is sort of TSA's attitude assessing risk, in that they will assess risk of certain areas of transportation, whether it's ground transportation or air transportation or specific aspects within the transportation. The difficulty is they don't budget the same way that they assess risk. So things that are low risk, for example, still, notwithstanding the change in, for example, the risk environment or the intelligence that they receive with regard to terrorist activity, their budget does not change in accordance with that. So money gets wasted basically fighting the last war.
Well, building on what you said, the CRS reported that we spent over $800 million on the Federal Air Marshal Services in years 15, 16, and 17. And that's an incredible amount of money to be spending on a service that is, quote, questionable. And the Government Accountability Office stated to the unclassified version of a report, and I quote, "For FAMS, TSA officials explained that it's very difficult to measure the effectiveness of federal air marshals and the program, and that there's absolutely no way to collect data," end quote. Do you agree with that? How in the world can you not measure, when you're spending $800 million on it, the results?
I don't agree with that, and TSA will tell you they have specific classified documents that talk about the risk of specific events occurring. So they measure it and can measure it. Our difficulty is that their measurement of the risk doesn't match their spending.
So what do we do about it?
Well, I'm a big fan of congressional oversight. One of the things that we're doing is that report is now classified at the secret level. We are going to redact the secret portions to make it a little more accessible. It'll be at the SSI level, so more members of Congress, for example, can see it and see whether or not this is an issue that is useful for oversight.
Well, since you can't discuss it because it's classified, could you meet with the members in a bipartisan way that are interested and discuss the classified sections with us?
Absolutely. We'd
Okay,
welcome the opportunity.
Maybe we can do that. I'd also like to follow up on one of the posts from TSA. Their website said they had 20 layers of U.S. aviation security. But again, you have reported that the checkpoint screening layer is deficient. Can you, to the extent that you can discuss the unclassified areas, could you share information on the screening deficiencies?
Well, the only thing I can really say is that, again, we do these tests about every 2 years. The last time we did these tests was in 2015. I characterized those tests back then as disappointing and disturbing. I would characterize the results this time the similar way. We found deficiencies in the equipment, we found deficiencies in the personnel, and we found deficiencies in the process by which they interacted with the equipment.
Well, I can say for a system that is critical to protecting American lives, this is unacceptable, and we need to be briefed on the classified section of it. And the warnings that are being raised about the extent of the problem, I find absolutely alarming, quite frankly. And we should begin by enforcing the existing subpoena that the TSA has ignored, completely ignored. And we should require depositions with TSA employees who have refused, absolutely refused, to answer questions voluntarily that this committee has put forward. So I personally look forward to your briefing, and thank you very much.
Yes.
Gentlelady from New York yields back. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Roth, I have a few questions relating to the ongoing disaster-related investigations. First of all, this committee staff recently met with your staff in Texas regarding the response and recovery to Hurricane Harvey. In Texas, the Office of Inspector General has been investigating disaster-related fraud claims. The impersonation of FEMA officials, bribery, extortion, and even human smuggling, are these typical crimes you see following a natural disaster?
Yes, we do. I mean, one of the things that we try to do in the very early stages of a natural disaster is that these folks have been victimized once by the natural disaster. We want to make sure that we try to prevent a second victimization by sort of the criminal elements who would come in either with various sort of scams or identity theft, those kinds of things. So we do see a lot of that typically in every natural disaster. So that's why we want to jump on it as early as we can.
What kinds of crimes and misconduct are you investigating in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands? Are there any particular trends you have assessed at this point?
It's going to be roughly the same kinds of things that your staff saw in Houston. So again, impersonation of FEMA officials, for example, identity theft, various kinds of scams. Charity scams, for example, are always a big one that we always have to take a hard look at. So it's really the panoply of criminal conduct that we almost see every disaster.
How are you allocating the OIG resources to ensure that disaster relief funds are not misdirected to bad actors who try to take advantage of federal programs to assist disaster survivors?
Yeah, we have a full court press on this. I mean, typically we spend roughly between $25 and $30 million a year on disaster relief. That's going to go up, obviously, as a result of these disasters. We're doing a full court press, particularly early on in the disaster, to make sure that we have a public presence, that people know we're there. We're doing really on-the-spot auditing work to sort of take a look at some of the contracts that have been let, to do sort of the basic name checks and criminal checks of the individuals who are getting contracts, to make sure that these aren't folks that are, for example, prohibited from federal work or, related in some way to a public official. Those are the kinds of things that we do early on. And then obviously once the public assistance money comes in, we'll be doing early warning audits to take a look at whether or not the entity that's involved has the capacity to use this money in an effective way. So we have a whole series of things that we'll do over the course of time. I mean, we're still finishing up Sandy work, for example, so it will take some time.
I understand the complexities and the difficulty that an agency like FEMA would have coming into a situation where you've had a natural disaster, but in the past, FEMA's had a lot of bad press, a lot of bad stories. Congress has continued to question FEMA and hopefully trying to determine if FEMA's learned from past mistakes. Do you feel like FEMA's on the right track as far as being efficient and trying to be responsive to the people in need, or what's your assessment right now of the direction we're headed with FEMA?
When you look at all of our audits reports, and there are hundreds of them, the picture that gets painted is that this is still not a mature agency. Mm-hmm. They don't have the kinds of internal controls that sort of a mature sort of organization should have in the spending of money. Their culture is one of disaster relief. They're very victim-centric, and I applaud the fact that they want to go in and they want to do whatever it takes. But what I worry about is that they don't have processes in place that will help during stressful times like a natural disaster.
And that's what makes it difficult for members like myself who are concerned about the debt. I believe in a limited government. It's government's responsibility to help people that can't help themselves, like in a disaster situation. But speaking for myself, confidence level in FEMA isn't where it needs to be, and that's unfortunate because I know we have a lot of people in need, and I believe that this agency can and should be the point of contact between the government and the people. But I'm hopeful that FEMA will try to improve and restore confidence in at least members like myself that have read some of these audits and have serious concerns about the direction that agency's headed. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member. I want to thank our witnesses. Thank you for the job that you do every day. Not only is it very important work, but it is becoming rarer as, at least on this committee, we have, I think, abdicated our responsibility to conduct meaningful oversight, so your work becomes even more important. Mr. Roth, it'd be great to hear, maybe offline, your most recent review of TSA and what's going on there. You've done incredible work. Ms. Buller had a chance to visit with the Peace Corps volunteers in Tanzania. We got some young American kids over there that are out there hundreds of miles from any major town, and basically trying to instruct the folks there, the tribal members, on avoiding HIV infection, things like that. But You know, I know we instantly recognize the heroism of and the courage of our military personnel, but I don't think we give enough respect and acknowledgement to some of these kids in the Peace Corps. Carrie Radlitz, who's running the program over there, or at least was recently, they're doing incredible work over there, really deserve a lot of support, so I really appreciate the work you're doing. Mr. Horowitz, I want to talk to you about, you did a wonderful, in-depth, thorough investigation of the use of confidential informants by the ATF, the FBI, and DEA. And we found, you found, that there was almost no oversight being done in terms of how we select confidential informants. In my district, we had a couple of instances where confidential informants were actually committing murders while they were on the payroll of the FBI. And we've got a lot of evidence out there that bad things are happening. So ATF has about 1,800 active informants. DEA has about 1,800 informants. I think there's a blind spot here. The DEA has paid approximately $237 million out to about 9,000 of their informants. They paid $25 million to 8 people over the last 5 years. There is very little evidence that we can see about how these people were chosen, where the tax money is going to pay these informants, what value they are to law enforcement efforts. It's a black hole. So, you know, you've done some great reports. I know there's an addendum here, this year addendum to last year's review. Has anything improved here in terms of their accountability, in terms of who they choose as an informant, whether they report the crimes? So there's a lot of crimes being committed by confidential informants with the protection of government on the payroll of the government. And we don't get any reports at all. Congress gets, we don't want to know anything. That's just out there. They do their thing. It's unconscionable, but that's the situation that exists. Has anything gotten better?
First of all, I agree with you on your assessment, and as you know, and we've talked about, our office worked on the Bulger matter that you referred to, which was the FBI informant, both on his prosecution and the agent's prosecution. These are very serious issues. These are people who are usually involved in illegal activity before they become informants, not always, but often, who are then being authorized to conduct additional illegal actions with the stamp of approval of the federal government and the Justice Department in this instance. We found widespread problems, as you noted. Part of the report, the addendum, is the classified piece of it, so I can't go into some of those details.
Yeah, let me just stop you right there. Yeah. We have to do this. We have to do our work. You know, Mr. Horowitz, we're going all three of you, I would recommend we do a separate hearing with each one of you, a public hearing about what we can talk about, and then we do three basically restricted forums where it's in camera, and that we get the rest of the information for you, because this is just unconscionable that this would be allowed to continue. It's putting the national security and the privacy protections of the general public at great risk.
I agree, and be more than happy to come and speak with you and other members about the non-public information, but also obviously keep you and the committee informed about what we're seeing as we do follow-up work. Obviously, we will continue to watch how this is going, because we agree these are very significant issues that we've identified.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Massachusetts yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, I want to come to you. I'd like to change gears a little bit, go back to the Puerto Rico discussion. Last month, the DOJ recommended that the oversight board that Congress established for Puerto Rico, that it take steps to ensure that the federal disaster relief funds are protected from creditors. Has your office, have y'all reviewed those recommendations?
We have not yet, and I'd be happy to follow up and check into that and get back to you.
Is there any reason that you haven't?
Frankly, with the variety of work and on our plate, we are, obviously interested in looking at it and talking with you further about it.
Please do, and I would like your input on that. Yesterday, we had in Natural Resources a hearing that involved the governor of Puerto Rico, and I was able to question it. I have some very serious concerns with this whole thing. October 23rd, he established by executive order the CRRO, the Central Recovery and Reconstruction Office for Puerto Rico. And according to that executive order and his own testimony, the purpose of the CRRO would be as a central collector of all the various streams of financial support that the island is receiving. All right, that sounds pretty good, but when you start coming down to the enormous amounts of money that are coming in, I mean, just yesterday he requested between $90 and $100 billion yet to come. And so my question is, if we here in Congress have authorized the Oversight Board to oversee the economic recovery of Puerto Rico, where does this leave the CRRO, and what kind of conflict is involved in it?
Yeah, and I'm certainly happy to look into that. We did an audit report last year on the department's money going into Puerto Rico and found a wide variety of concerns and problems about that. So this is a very important issue. There's a lot of federal government money going, not just with the disaster relief efforts, but day in, day out.
Right, day in and day out. And let me ask a couple more questions with this. And Mr. Roth, I'm going to come to you on this too, because I want to get my head wrapped around as much of this as I can. Do you know whether or not the CRRO will be accountable to the Oversight Board?
I don't know the answer to that as I sit here, but I'm certainly happy to look into it.
Yeah, I don't know either, I'm sorry.
How can we be looking at all this money flowing in there with a new established office, a CRRO, and we don't have any idea where all this, I mean, streams of gobs of money going in this, and there seems to me that there's no accountability in this, and they're asking for more and more all along. Will the Office of the Inspector General be investigating the CRRO?
Well, I'm going to follow up and look at the issues. I will just say in terms of the disaster recovery monies, just want to mention that SIGI, the Council of IGs, has a disaster assistance working group to make sure we're all coordinated as IGs. Actually, IG Roth leads that effort. He's had meetings already about it. We've coordinated and we're talking to GAO. They've participated in these discussions. We want to have a comprehensive review on the disaster recovery effort. And I'll just add, you're going to see in the next several weeks on oversight.gov a new link and a web page so the public can watch where that money has been going in our oversight efforts on the disaster recovery efforts.
That would be very helpful. We're just talking tens and tens of billions of dollars involved, and more probably on the way. And there appears to me to be absolutely no accountability. I'd like to know if there's going to be any auditing. I want to know if the Oversight Board is going to have any real oversight or involvement in this. They may be a conduit for the money to go into and be dispersed, but who's overseeing that whole process?
And that's the issue that I think we have to follow up and see where the money is coming from and where it's going to so that we understand who's conducting oversight. Just to be clear, with all of the oversight work we all do, the first line of defense has got to be the agency and the entity. We have limited staff. I have 470 people now in my OIG to oversee 110,000 people. I have a $100 million budget, $95 million budget to oversee a $28 billion budget. So, and John's numbers actually, IG Roth's numbers are probably even more skewed the other way. So, you know, we've got limited resources. We've got to make sure our agencies are doing the work they need to do as well.
We do, and we've got to make sure there's oversight of all of this. I was stunned with his request of $90 to $100 billion. And I did a little research. That's more than what NASA is requesting for the Mars One project that goes from 2011 to the mid-30s, where we're actually going to be building a permanent human colony on Mars, for crying out loud. And Puerto Rico is wanting more money. It's like, this is an unbelievable amount of money, and we have got to make sure that the accountability is there. And I thank you for your assistance in that. I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back. The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to talk a little bit about the hiring freeze. On January 23, 2017, President Trump imposed a government-wide hiring freeze for civilian employees. In April, the Office of Management and Budget replaced the President's hiring freeze with a directive to all federal agencies, quote, begin taking immediate actions to achieve near-term workforce reductions and cost savings. The Democratic Committee staff surveyed Inspector Generals at 24 federal agencies to determine the potential effect of these actions on their ability to conduct oversight of federal programs and operations. Mr. Horowitz, the response we received from your office in March stated, and I quote, as we continue to assess the impact of the hiring freeze and prospect of a reduced budget, DOJ OIG is concerned about the potential impact that a period of sharply limited resources could have on our ability to continue to perform the kind and range of audits, evaluations, and investigations that are expected of us. I understand that your office was able to hire some staff this year. How could a hiring freeze impact an IG office and its ability to conduct oversight?
Obviously, a hiring freeze would have an impact or could have an impact on IGs because of the limitations on adding staff. We are, as IG Roth mentioned earlier, all of our work is driven by our staff and our ability to do their work. I'll just add this caveat. We were largely exempted from the hiring freeze as IGs because of our law enforcement, other important responsibilities. What does worry myself and other IGs is flat budgets for us is in effect a hiring cut because costs increase, rent increases, healthcare increases, other benefits increase, meaning we have to reduce staff if we're held flat. And that does have an impact on us. We're not like the FBI, DEA, other parts of the Justice Department. They can look to non-personnel costs to save money. We're all about two things as a general matter, people and rent. And we're not going to close our buildings because we still have people working in them.
Right.
So it's all going to have to come out of personnel.
So freezes and flat budgets both impact the mission of your organizations.
So I would just encourage, that is actually far more important to me and my office than perhaps the hiring freeze was because of the exemption we were given.
Okay. Mr. Roth, the survey response that our staff received from your office stated, and I quote, that said, to adhere to the intent of the hiring freeze, there are still many support positions that are on hold during the freeze that we believe, based on past experience, will over time reduce the department's overall capacity and capability. However, the long-term impact remains to be determined. Is your office taking any actions to implement the OMB directive?
Yes. So what we have done, and again, the freeze was lifted in April, as you note, and since then we are hiring up to our budget levels. So there was a pause while we tried to understand what it was that was going on, but we have now been able to continue to hire basically to our full-time equivalent level. Again, to reiterate what I said in my testimony, as well as what Mr. Horowitz testified to, what we worry about is future budgets. The President's budget for me for fiscal 18 has a 10% cut in our budget, and that would be 10% below this year's level, at the same time that the rest of DHS is increasing. So as their risks increase, our opportunity to take a look at those risks and try to mitigate those risks decline. So that's what we worry about more than a freeze.
Okay. Many IG offices responded to our survey, noting serious concern about the impact of the administration's hiring freeze and proposed staffing reductions. The Department of State IG reported that it faces, and I quote, staffing challenges in our oversight of Operation Inherent Resolve and Operation Freedom Sentinel, the U.S. efforts to defeat the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant and the Taliban, respectfully. The EPA IG warned that staffing reductions could, and I quote, hinder significantly our ability to exchange protective intelligence information with the FBI, Secret Service, and Marshal Service, which would delay the apprehension of criminals. Given how impactful IG offices can be in preventing waste, fraud, and abuse, it makes very little sense to impose a freeze, staffing reductions, or budget cuts on IGs. The Government Accountability Office found that a previous hiring freeze, and I quote, caused decreased oversight of federal programs by making it more difficult for the Inspector General offices to do their jobs, something we want you to have the capability to do. And I yield back.
Gentlelady from Illinois yields back. The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you, all three of you, for the work that you do. Our government would be far less efficient without the fantastic work that you do. Mr. Buller, I would like to start with you, but actually ask all three of you because you had expressed concern, along with Mr. Horowitz, about desire for an independent testimonial subpoena authority. And I think this is important that we explore that a little more. Would you speak to that, and actually all three of you, of why this subpoena authority you feel is necessary?
Often during the time that we're conducting an audit or an investigation, people who have knowledge of events that happened during the course of the activities that resulted in the audit or investigation leave for whatever reason. Either they retire conveniently sometimes, or they just leave. And we cannot, once they leave the government, make them talk to us. When they're employees of the government, we do have the ability to access them. Once they're gone, we don't. And in the Peace Corps, it's exacerbated because we have a 5-year term limit. So there's people coming and going all the time, and most of the time they don't even stay for the 5 years. So once they're gone, and we're in the middle of an audit, we can't talk to them about it, or if they don't want to talk to us. That's the importance of a testimonial subpoena.
No, it's and I appreciate that the insight on the 5-year term limit, which makes it even more difficult. Mr. Horowitz, and then Mr. Roth.
Yeah, I'll speak to whistleblower matters. Congress, for good reason, gave IGs authority to look at whistleblower retaliation at contractors and grant recipients when management there tried to shut down employees from reporting waste, fraud, and abuse to us. Well, the challenge is, unlike employees in the federal government, which when they're employed they have to speak to us, the same isn't true for current or former employees of contractors or grant recipients. And so we have that authority now to investigate, but I've had cases where the people who were the alleged retaliators either left their jobs, in which case they clearly were unreachable to us because they weren't going to voluntarily speak to us, or even if they were still at the job, it would require management of that organization to tell the employee to speak to us, because there's no other way to do that. And so it's very important in the whistleblower space, as well as, frankly, the misconduct space. We see not infrequently department employees conveniently retiring on the eve of being questioned about the misconduct we're investigating.
Seems to be a bad habit. Mr. Roth?
Yeah, and I would add, for example, in the FEMA context, most of the money goes to states as grantees, and then to state and locals as municipalities, and then to private contractors. So just to trace the money and do a basic fraud investigation, never mind the whistleblower retaliation, requires the cooperation of all those folks. Now, the grants give us access to documents, but they don't give us access to people. So being able to go in and interview folks and get people on the record in those kinds of fraud contexts is enormously important.
No, that's great insight. And so we've had some authority kind of like this in the past. It's now disappeared. What's the fix? It's obviously going to require legislative, but what are your ideas on this?
Well, it would require a legislative fix, and to be clear, the Defense Department IG has this authority and has used it very judiciously and appropriately, and as they've noted, just having the authority causes people to want to speak voluntarily, frankly, probably much like this committee, right? You don't probably have to issue many subpoenas to get people to come in and speak with you, but it helps to know that that subpoena power is there. We would need legislation. We worked very closely with the supporters of this in this committee and on the Senate side to put in place controls around it, because it was reasonable. There were reasonable concerns to make sure that we would use it in connection with people who actually benefited from government programs. We weren't running around trying to subpoena people who, I'm not sure why we would have the time to do that, but we wouldn't use it for that purpose. So we're prepared to sit down and address any concerns about the use of it, make sure there's effective oversight. We had talked about a 3IG panel to make sure that existed, and that was what was originally in the draft legislation that we worked with the committee on. We're prepared to work and make sure this is used reasonably and appropriately. Frankly, just having the authority, I think, will cause us to not need to use it.
Well, and your point on Department of Defense is spot on. Them having the authority really precludes a lot of subpoenas. And Mr. Chairman, I think this is something that we ought to explore, that we ought to try to do, because without teeth behind the bark, it's not really going to matter much. And for the record, I would like to assist this committee in that effort. I think that it is something worth doing. And I've run out of time, and I yield back.
We'll do one better. We'll let you take the lead. Why don't you be our lead on finding a way to?
Well, I'm happy and honored to work with the IGs on this issue. I do think it is, we see it in other aspects of government where it's very effective, it's not abused, and I think for our IGs to do even more incredible work, we need to give them the proper tools. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. I'll now recognize myself. I'll start by thanking all three witnesses. IG Horowitz, I'm going to probably direct my questions to you, in part because of what you do now and in part because of what you used to do in a very distinguished career as an assistant United States attorney. Give us the other side of the argument on compulsory process. Because when something, it sounds like a great idea, and this does, the ability to compel evidence, really, the fact that we don't have it leads me to believe that there is at least some argument on the other side. What would it be?
So the Justice Department itself has opposed giving IGs.
That would be an argument.
And their concern has been that if we subpoena somebody and compel them to speak to us, that could negatively impact their ability to pursue criminal cases in matters they may have ongoing that we don't know about. We put in place a procedure in the Act to address that. The Department would get notice before we issued any subpoenas. Much like is currently in existence, as you know, from being an AUSA yourself, that before anybody gives immunity to anybody in the Justice Department, there's a central process for doing that to make sure an AUSA in New York doesn't harm a case going on by an AUSA in South Carolina, for example. That's what we proposed here, and frankly, I, as a former prosecutor, don't understand that argument. If I was the AUSA handling that case that was criminal and they didn't know about our work, I'd want to know about our work because that could give them additional leverage in their criminal case. So as a former prosecutor, frankly, I don't understand the argument once you put in place the protections, and Mr. Roth also is a former prosecutor, and we very much respect the concern, and we'll work with them to put that in place. But there's a way to address that, I think.
Well, I hope so. I think there has to be. The ability to simply leave your place of employment and avoid scrutiny or having to provide information makes it really tough to conduct fulsome investigations. Keep that same old hat on for a second.
Okay.
There's an issue with respect to OPR. Explain for those who may not have worked for the Department of Justice, don't understand what OPR is. What is the issue there, and what are both sides of the argument?
Okay. So the Office, OPR, the Office of Professional Responsibility at the Justice Department, was created long before the IG Act was passed to look at misconduct by prosecutors. The head of that office is appointed by the department's leadership, the Deputy AG and the Attorney General, and they handle all allegations prosecutorial misconduct against prosecutors for conduct in connection with their jobs as lawyers. So, for example, in the courtroom and those kinds of issues. That's a carve-out that exists now in the IG Act, so that when my office was created back in 1988, it was carved out of our jurisdiction. We're the only IG with this carve-out. And it means that while we look at misconduct by FBI agents, DEA agents, ATF agents, other personnel, non-lawyers in the department, as well as lawyers when they engage in misconduct outside of work, we can't look at allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. We don't see a principled reason why we should be able to look at FBI agents' misconduct, but not misconduct by federal prosecutors. If it's important enough to have independent oversight by a statutorily independent IG over FBI agents, surely it's the same for prosecutors who wield at least as much power as FBI agents by their ability to act improperly in a courtroom. The flip of that has been, the department's argument has been, and again, they've always opposed giving that authority to us, is that the Office of Professional Responsibility has managed that function effectively since its creation. They know how to do those cases, and there's no reason to change the process. It's my view that for purposes of independent oversight and transparency, there have been many issues coming forward in the last many years about questions of oversight of prosecutors. Several judges have raised concerns, and I think people would be hard-pressed to explain to an FBI agent why they need independent oversight by an inspector general, but that the prosecutors they're working with day in, day out, they go to through another door.
Particularly in many instances, the Bureau agent herself or himself may also be an attorney. So their agent conduct is scrutinized or investigated one way. And if I heard you correctly, Representative Heiss, Cedric Richmond from Louisiana have worked with you on proposing a legislative remedy in this area as well as the one Stevie made reference to.
That's correct.
All right.
And we have we've worked as well with bipartisan members on the Senate side to do the same.
Last issue, because I'm out of time, I don't like to do it, but quickly, I'm not asking you about the merits of it. You couldn't talk about it, wouldn't ask you about it, but your reputation for integrity is well-deserved and has been around for a long time. You are looking into certain matters and decisions made by the Department of Justice in the 2016 election cycle, calendar year.
Right.
Do you have an update from a time standpoint? And secondarily, are you able to access all the witnesses and documents that you think are necessary for you to conduct a fulsome investigation?
And I can certainly talk to the process questions and the timing questions, and I appreciate you respecting the ability to complete that in an independent way. In terms of process, we have gotten all the records we've asked for. We've gotten them as a general matter in a timely fashion. We've interviewed dozens of people. We're not at the 100 level yet, but we're in the dozens range. We've reviewed about 1.2 million records in the course of the investigation, so pretty substantial effort by the team, which has done great work. We are aiming to release the report in late winter, early spring, so hopefully in that March-April time period. Obviously, I can't commit to that because, as we've seen, events can arise, issues can arise that require us to do additional interviews or get additional records. And given there's a classified piece to this, as you know, it requires a significant process to make sure that individuals who are no longer at the department or lawyers for individuals who are no longer at the department can actually be part of those interviews by getting renewed clearances. So that's impacted somewhat the time frame, but we're moving along quite expeditiously, and that's my hope.
Thank you. I thought I was last, but the gentleman from Wisconsin has joined us. And I apologize, I'm General Lady from Michigan. I didn't see you. I'm old and I can't see that far.
No, you have a lot of years left, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Roth, 2 years ago, you testified before this committee after your team completed testing at TSA checkpoints that your team had ran tests using different concealment methods at 8 different airports. You reported, and I quote, "The test results were disappointing and troubling." Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. With that being said, 2 years ago, you testified that, quote, "The department's response to our most recent findings have been swift." You said that then Secretary of DHS directed that an immediate plan of action be created to correct deficiencies uncovered during that testing. Was that plan implemented, and if not, why not?
It was implemented. The difficulty, of course, is that it's a massive problem. in 3 areas. One, training personnel. They have over 40,000 transportation security officers that would need to get trained. They have technology issues that are going to require a long-term fix of research and development and deployment. And then they had process issues as far as their standard operating procedures missed certain methods of concealment that needed to get tightened up. They started a training program, a fairly rigorous training program, particularly for new employees. They are on their way to try to fix the technology. And then lastly, they have, I think, done a pretty good job of tightening up their procedures with regard to that. The difficulty is the training and the technology piece are long-term fixes.
So with that being said, as we know that it's troubling to you, it is absolutely troubling for the American citizens who are subjected to this obvious inefficiency. So we talked about long-term. What does long-term and what is the expectation? I say to you that we can expect this removal of troubling findings that we are aware of.
We made 8 recommendations in this last audit report. The department agreed with each of those 8 recommendations. This is an enormously difficult problem, but it's one it's going to require constant attention to get right. One of the things that we found, for example, when we did our covert testing this time, is that we asked whether or not the TSOs who we discovered deficiencies with had gone through the training. And, frankly, notwithstanding the fact that they have been training people at a record pace as a percentage of the workforce, only a small percentage of that workforce has been trained. We found other issues that we hadn't discovered in our last.
What's the timeline? What is?
I don't have the timeline. The process that we use is that we make our recommendations, the department takes it, and in 90 days they give us a plan. So we have not received that plan yet, so I can't.
I would like for this committee to be updated because the American people need to know what the expectation is that we are in compliance.
Yeah.
I have a very important issue. As you know, I represent Michigan, Detroit. At the end of September, ICE arrested nearly 500 people in 10 different cities and regions across the country. It's evident that many of these immigrants may not be dangerous. In fact, sometimes their only supposed crime is crossing the border before they work and pay taxes. Do you know currently what is ICE criteria for deciding which communities to target and deport? How does ICE ensure it's not wasting taxpayers' dollars and time by targeting non-dangerous immigrants? Did you examine whether ICE is using resources and inefficiency in this new criteria of it appears to be rounding people up? I really need an answer for that, Mr. Roth.
We have not done any specific audit work with regard to ICE priorities. What we have done is spend a considerable amount of resources on misconduct cases where we'll get reports of misconduct. For example, we're doing a series of investigations at the southwest border regarding individuals who have credible fear claims who are being turned away without having those credible fear claims adjudicated. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, but we haven't looked at and commented on specifically ICE's priorities or the Secretary's priorities and how it is that they are using those resources.
Well, it needs to be looked at, and I can tell you in a community that's not on the southwest border that we have major issues in large immigrant communities of disparate treatment that when we question, and I as a member of Congress, there seems to be no following of an agenda or priority set by anyone. So are we just renegade across the country? We should all know what the criteria and why we are operating the way we are. And this is something that is extremely important for our communities, for people who are living in our cities. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady from Michigan yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Sure, I'll give you a couple of questions. The Inspector General Empowerment Act provided an exemption to Inspector Generals from the Computer Matching Act. Has this improved your oversight?
It has the potential to greatly improve our oversight. It'll allow IGs to use computer matching more efficiently. One of the problems we had with the Computer Matching Act to begin with was that our agencies were involved in the approval process of us being able to match. Since we don't have to do that anymore, it will allow IGs to more effectively take information from an agency and one IG to another IG and match it and ferret out more improper payments and fraud.
Good. Can you give me some specific examples?
I can tell you about what happened when we didn't have it before, and the delays that were incurred. We took a look at the individuals who have what's called a CITA badge, which is a secure identification. It's an access card to parts of the airport where airplanes are. Obviously, you're supposed to have a specific security clearance for that or a certain background check for it. So we took a list of those folks, which is 900,000 people, and we bounced it against the list that the intelligence community has, what they call their TIDE database, which is the Terrorist Identity Data Mart environment. Basically, it's their list of all known or suspected terrorists. And hopefully, those two subsets of information, there would be no individuals who were in both subsets. What we found, in fact, were that the 73 individuals who were on this terror list also had access to secure parts of the airport, obviously of considerable concern to TSA and aviation security. It took us 18 months just to get the approval for the computer matching. So that is the kind of delay that is now gone as a result of the Computer Matching Act. And it's, I know from our point of view, we're going to be using it on these hurricane relief efforts significantly. If I can take the list of people who are FEMA recipients for housing and bounce that against the HUD database of people who are receiving those very same benefits, see who falls out, and then we know that people are getting duplicate payments.
And thank you. Let me just add, one of the things that myself and Vice Chair Alison Lerner have done in meeting with OMB is encourage them to consider a pilot program with several cabinet-level agencies to look at whether there's improper benefits going to employees of those agencies or other recipients of those agencies that are duplicative of benefits, whether it's disability or Section 8 housing or food stamps or any of the other large federal programs out there, to try and use our authority in a way that would find these duplicative payments. GAO's reported that number is well in excess of $100 billion a year. So it's an important tool that you've given us, and we're using it in several instances.
Thanks. Hopefully all the agencies will take advantage of your findings. We'll see. Give you one more question, Mr. Roth, since you brought it up. When you talk about people coming into this country because they're fearful, which countries are people coming here from that they're fearful?
I don't have data. Anecdotally, the agents tell me on the southwest border that it's largely Central American countries, but I don't have the specific sort of numbers. I'm sure that you can get that from USCIS, for example.
They're not adjacent to the country. Are we supposed to take in somebody here? Or how would they be getting in here from a South Central American country?
I mean, typically the immigration patterns are through Mexico.
Okay. Are they in danger in Mexico or just in danger in?
Again, we don't look at those. All we look at is whether or not the department is following the policy that's already in place rather than the wisdom of the policy itself.
Okay. Thanks much, and I'll yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Wisconsin yields back. The gentleman from Maryland, Professor Raskin, is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and delighted to be with you guys. Forgive me, I had another hearing, so I had to step out, but I'm excited to ask a few questions to Mr. Horowitz. And I want to ask you about a June 29th letter that the Democrats on this committee and Judiciary sent to you raising concerns that Attorney General Sessions may have departed from his decision to recuse himself when he participated personally and directly in President Trump's decision to dismiss FBI Director Comey. You've received that letter, right?
Yes.
The reason we wrote you is because the Attorney General said he was recusing from all matters relating to the 2016 campaign, both the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign, but then worked directly with President Trump and the Deputy Attorney General to fire Mr. Comey, the FBI director. And it was said they were firing Comey because of the way he handled the Clinton investigation. In reality, of course, the president admitted both to a group of visiting Russians in his office and on national TV, that he fired Director Comey because of his distaste for the Russian investigation and that Comey was becoming a problem for him. My question is whether your office is investigating the issues we raised in our letter, whether the Attorney General violated his decision to recuse when he undertook these actions.
So we did receive the letter, and one of the things that whenever we get requests like that in any space is there an ongoing department investigation? And as you know, there was a special counsel appointed. The request from the letter request relates to matters that could touch on that investigation. And one of the things that we try and do as IGs is obviously defer, continue to consider and assess a request like that when there's an ongoing department investigation. So we have not made a final decision on that.
Gotcha. Did you say, I'm sorry, you've not
made a decision
I got
on
you.
that.
Okay.
In
Because
light of
I
that.
understand that as a general policy, but if the subject is, if the subject of the investigation is the recusal of the Attorney General or another high official, him or herself, one would think that the IG policy would have to adjust for that, right?
And obviously, every situation, it depends on the specific facts. I think one of the things we generally try and do is hold in abeyance any activity while there's an ongoing FBI or in this case, special counsel investigation.
Gotcha.
Normally, it would be FBI.
Well,
that's what we're doing here.
But it's still, the ball is still in spin.
Ball's still in my court.
It's in your court, okay. On Monday, DOJ sent a letter to the Judiciary Committee saying that the Attorney General had been directly involved in decisions regarding the appointment of a special counsel to investigate, and I quote, the sale of Uranium One, alleged unlawful dealings related to the Clinton Foundation and other matters. The letter says the AG directed senior federal prosecutors to evaluate whether a special counsel should be appointed and told them to report their findings directly to the Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General. So this letter indicates that the AG is not recusing himself from these matters and is still directly involved and seems to contradict what he claimed he'd been doing before, which was to recuse himself from them. Now, I understand your position that you're, as long as it appears like something's going on, you're not going to get involved. But I just want to know whether you agree with me as to the importance of this matter. At the Attorney General's confirmation hearing on January 10th, testified, and I quote, I believe the proper thing for me to do would be to recuse myself from any questions involving those kinds of investigations that involve Secretary Clinton and that would raise during the campaign or be otherwise connected to it. We remember one of the pervasive chants of the campaign was lock her up, and they were raising all these questions about the Clinton Foundation. Senator Grassley asked him a follow-up question, and I quote, he said, to be very clear, you intend to recuse yourself from both the Clinton email investigation and any matters involving the Clinton Foundation, if there are any. And the Attorney General responded, and I quote, yes. So he testified under oath he would have nothing to do with any investigations that involve Secretary Clinton that were raised as a political football during the campaign or that were otherwise connected to it. And he explicitly referred to the Clinton Foundation, but the letter that we saw on Monday from DOJ suggests the opposite, that he's working directly on these matters when he shouldn't be. And I understand it's complicated because you're dealing with investigations that might relate to people within the Department of Justice. But will you please agree to look into this and report back to us as soon as you have an update and a resolution as to what you think the proper role of the IG is?
Yeah. As I said, I will certainly be in that position with the prior letter and be happy to receive any additional information about Monday's letter or Monday's letter to the Congress or any other matter. I'll just say as a general matter, take conflict of interest matters and recusal matters. Those are important. Obviously, much of it turns on the conflict of interest laws and the regulations, which, as you know, are somewhat arcane and complex. But we're certainly happy to take under advisement any matter that a member of Congress or the committee wishes us to consider and assess.
Thank you, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
gentleman from Maryland yields back, I want to thank our witnesses on behalf of Mr. Cummings and all the other members and myself. Thank all of you for appearing before us today. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks for any member to submit a written opening statement or questions for the record. There is no further business. Without objection, committee stands adjourned. I actually do like it.